Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Clintstone Chapter 7 Greetings, written by some guy named Ted. The link to the original will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. If you do, please consider subscribing. Otherwise, you may have to deal with some sentient carnivorous cheese in your fridge tonight. The fun thing about the universe is that it was always expanding, getting ever bigger. In our galactic cluster, there was over 100 different sentient races, but that's just a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of the universe, comprised of billions and billions of galactic clusters. There is an infinitely multitudes of worlds with life on them. Who knows? Maybe one of them has a species who can out-Clintstone. That seems unlikely, but stranger things have been known to happen. These galactic clusters are the basis of the galactic politics, with every cluster leaving the rest to their business. On occasion, ships find their way between clusters, but this happens very rarely. 1. It requires a lot of time and power. 2. There is no real need. You can find everything you need in your own galactic cluster. 3. There is a potential that you run into another race that are in the dark void, and it turns out that they're not so friendly. In that case, it is best that someone tells you not to come into this galaxy, or scares you enough to stay away. When the Kajurjan met Clint, he managed to convince them that they would be wise to avoid this galaxy. It wasn't that difficult. We had been flying through warp about 2 months after the disastrous feast on Fortunus Major, traveling by Deusur, when Susan detected a ship of unknown design in there with us. Clint, being a curious human that he was, decided it would be fun to go find out what it was. Susan purred through the warp space as swift as an arrow. Clint sat in his captain's chair, as he called it, gazing out the front viewport. He did that every time we flew through warp, no matter how long it would be in there. I think he wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to run into anything, even though that was statistically impossible. I, on the other hand, had complete faith in statistics, and I was seated in one of the co-pilot chairs, watching my vid player. Beep! I looked up. The ship had never made that sound before. Clint stiffened and swung his face over to the radar. Translation note. It is not truly a radar, but that word will suffice. I stood up and walked behind him, wondering what that could have been. The screen showed a large mass ahead, traveling at half the speed of Susan. It looks like we have some company, Clint said, but I've never seen a ship like that before. The lines are all wrong. With the flow of the quantum generator, they wouldn't get enough power for... Oh, I see. It's a Ferron manipulators who would take care of the backflow. That could work, I guess. Regardless, it looks like they've never flown before. The hull is still shiny and new. How can you possibly have seen that from a little blob on the screen? I are sure that he was playing a joke on me. Clint pointed out the viewport. I didn't. I saw it out there. We had stopped, dropping out warp without me even knowing it. Clint liked to do that to me. Without a jolt of the ordinary ship's experience, I had no way of knowing that we had left warp. It appeared that the other ship had as well, because I could see it looming out of our viewport, a vast grey expanse floating in space. The ship bore no familiar insignia or symbols. I prided myself on having a large store of knowledge on the galaxy and its inhabitants, but I couldn't recognize anything about the ship. I told this to Clint. Where do you think it came from? I don't recognize the markings or the design. He shrugged. Maybe it's some new species. I scoffed. There was no way that it was a new race. Very likely it was some lord or banker that decided that he wanted a different ship than everybody else. Clint swung back to the controls on the ship and started to draw closer. Why are we getting closer? I asked. They could be hostile. They haven't shown any signs of that yet, and I'm curious as to who these strangers are. Before us, the ship turned so that it was broadside us, a perfect position to shoot us full of missiles. A gap appeared in the side, and I braced myself for the sudden acceleration as Clint avoided the missiles. But it didn't come. Instead, as we drew nearer, I saw that the gap was in fact a hangar door bay, and they were inviting us in. Either the ones who piloted the ship were so confident in their strength that they would let an unknown ship into their own, or they were so trusting that they were willing to let anyone in. Both possibilities were equally disturbing, but in very different ways. Clint flew Susan expertly into the hangar, setting her down softly. Out of the viewport, I could see several beings running around on the ship, seemingly going about their business. From what little I could see of them, I could tell that they were bipedal, like much of the other sentient races, and they were a particularly bright shade of green. They seemed to glow from the color, and it seemed that they had little to no hair anywhere on their bodies, as the whole of their bodies glowed with the same intensity. "Shall we go meet the strange beings?" Clint said, without waiting for an answer. He leapt out of the captain's chair and made his way to the bay. I followed, though with considerably less enthusiasm. I was prepared to have a fight or run for our lives. Clint was unconcerned, confident in his ability to get us out of trouble if it did arise, which it normally did with him around. Trouble followed him like a duckling following its mother, and he always had a way out. The bay ramp lowered, touching down with a dull thump on the metal floor of the hangar. Clint strode down the ramp without a care, his arms swinging at his sides. I walked down after him, my arms held to my sides, as the room waited for several of the beings. As we got closer, I could see more of the other features. Their heads were round and smooth, devoid of hair. They did not seem to have ears, only little holes in the sides of their heads. Eyes set deep in their skulls were great, bulbous black orbs, without pupils or irises. They had a mouth, but it was strangely shaped, close in appearance to the mouth of a fish. The being standing in the middle of the group stepped forward with his mouth moved. I had no idea what it was supposed to mean, but being a more diplomatic of the two of us, it fell on me to make the proper introductions. Clint and I decided that after the disastrous meeting with the Garp Lord. "Greetings, my name is Tedx, and my companion is called Clint Stone. We offer our humble thanks for your allowance of us on your ship." As I didn't know what race of the beings were, I could not use any introduction that their race found proper, but I used the galactic basic standard greeting, hoping that they knew it. "Greetings, Tedx and Clint. My name is Admiral Burns. We welcome you to our lazy traveler." His voice was high, tweaking voice, one that seemed almost musical. His pronunciation of the galactic basic was slightly off, a strange twisting of letters, but it was understandable. One of the beings to the Admiral's right leaned in and whispered something in his ear-hole. The Admiral turned his head to the side and whispered back with that strange tongue of theirs. The being nodded and then turned back to us. "My apologies, this ship is actually called the Great Traveler. I'm still unused to the new tongue. We only learned it a few years ago." "No offense taken, Admiral," Clint said. When we spoke, the other beings looked in unison at him. His voice was loud and it carried far into the metal hangar, very unlike their own. Clint as a whole was a very different form from them. They were shorter than me by a fair margin, and they looked like children next to Clint. Their arms and legs were thin and stick-like next to Clint's log-sized limbs. But they did not seem afraid of him, so that was the point of our favor. "Are you new to the neighborhood?" Straight into the point, as always. "Is neighborhood this galaxy?" the Admiral asked. "Please call me Burns." "Close enough, Burns," Clint told him. "Then yes, this is our race's first trip into the galaxy. Won't you follow us? Standing here is taking a very uncomfortable, and we have refreshments in the nearby cabin." Clint was never one to turn down food, so we were soon ushered into a large white room. Around a wide metal table, on the table was a vast arrangement of what I assumed were fruits and vegetables. Several tall jugs sat on the table as well, holding between them a gold liquid, one the color of burnt wood, and a liquid that looked more like a solid than some of the fruits. Clint ducked his head and walked into the room and sat down in the cushioned chairs. I did the same. The Admiral walked in with the rest of his entourage, and they chose seats as well. A glass of gold liquid was poured for me and Clint. Before we could say anything, the Admiral encouraged us to eat and drink. I did so, taking a cautious sip of the liquid. Generally speaking, if one sentient being can eat something, so can the rest. Clint is the exception here, but as a rule, most things served to you are edible. I was fairly confident that it was safe to consume the liquid, but it never hurt to be careful. The liquid tasted very bitter and hard. I almost spit it out, but that would have been very rude, and so I forced it down. After a second, a wonderful sweet taste spread over my tongue. I looked at the drink with a new appreciation. It was actually quite good. Clint had finished his glass and was eating the fruit that bore the slight resemblance to thewnberry. I finished my glass and turned my full attention to the Admiral. Clint noticed that we were about to begin speaking and set down his fruit. Admiral, if you don't mind me asking, where are you from? I've been most places in the galaxy, but I've never seen your race before. We aren't from this galaxy. We come from a galaxy far, far away. This is our first excursion into this part of the universe. We're here on a scientific and historical mission. We want to find out everything we can about this region of space. That's why we picked you up. You can give us some first-hand knowledge. The Admiral smiled. Or I assumed he smiled. He was a very long-winded speaker, but he was very friendly. What he said had surprised me. They were from another galaxy. This was truly a momentous event. We were the first beings of this galaxy that they'd ever seen. What we did would leave a great mark on their relations with this galaxy. You trusted us enough to allow us on your ship without taking precautions? Clint asked. Of course, why wouldn't we? It's just common decency. I was confused at that, but I did not dwell on it. The Admiral was being friendly to us. It would only be decent to be friendly back. We are by no means experts on this galaxy, but we will be happy to answer any questions you have, I said to the Admiral. He smiled, and one of his crew pulled out a large stack of paper-like material. How many races live in the galaxy? He asked eagerly. He was about to learn things no one of his civilization knew, and he was ecstatic. I couldn't blame him. I felt close to the same. Clint's face was hard to read, like it was every time he wasn't displaying great emotions. Sentient or not, I asked for clarification. Sentient. The number would be too large otherwise, I think. Somewhere in the number of 123. They scribbled it down. Interesting. That's quite a large number. Are you sure you are correct? I mean, no offense, but where are we from? There are only 2 races in the whole galaxy, and one is not even out of the cradle yet. I do believe so, I said, nodding. Of those other races, how many possess faster-than-light travel? All of them. Truly, that is remarkable. Did they discover it all on their own, or were they helped by the others before them? And on it went. He asked hundreds of questions, and I had hundreds of answers. It was nothing that could help a military invasion, if that was what that was about. Just general information that you could find anywhere. Clint added a piece or two when he felt it was necessary, but it was mostly just me and the Admiral talking. Our conversation continued for hours, and we were deeply engrossed. Clint was interested as well, but he had the tact to leave most of the talking to me. Talked about climate, technology, religion, eating habits. I learned much about the Kajorian, as they called themselves, and they learned much about us. What does this word meat mean? The Admiral asked. He had been talking about food, and he asked me which was my favorite. I replied that any meat cooked was the right delicious. Meat. Meat is the flesh of animals. His eyes grew wider and wider than they were normally. He looked horrified. You eat animals. You consume their flesh. I was confused. Of course we do. Don't you? No, we would never do such a thing. It's a great crime. He frantically scribbled down something, and then by the look on his face, it didn't look good. The conversation continued, a bit jerky to start, but it was back into the rhythm before long. Are all the races in this galaxy as large as you? Bernth asked Clint. He had gotten off topic as a physical makeup, and Clint was the one to answer those questions. I guess when you're used to ripping every manner of being apart, you get familiar with how they're built. No, I'm one of the largest beings in the galaxy. Only one race is bigger than me, and I'm stronger than they are. Fascinating. This question about you in particular, I hope you don't mind. What is your strength limit? You are a very large individual, and you look like you can use a lot of strength. I am one of the strongest beings in the galaxy. I don't know how to tell you what my strength level is in a manner that you can understand, so I'll have to show you. Might I demonstrate on this table? Bernth leaned forward with interest. Of course! Clint raised his fist above his head and brought it down forcibly upon the table. The resulting noise was loud enough to cause the Kajorian in the room to cover their ear holes. When Clint lifted his hand, there was a dent several inches deep in the metal. The Kajorian stared in shock. That is certainly impressive. Is there anything else that you should know about you? I knew this line of questioning was going to end poorly, but I couldn't stop it. Clint would answer either way. He told them of his ability to drink alcohol. That got them flustered, and they demanded a demonstration. He obliged them. Several of the Kajorian had left the room in shock. He also told them of his fighting abilities, his tongue lubricated by the alcohol. He boasted of his many feats of violence and passion. These shocked the Kajorian. Several of them fainted as he described killing the Lord Fuzi. It seems in the galaxy where they were from, violence is rare. Everything is solved by talking, and there is never any killing of animals. War wasn't heard of. When Clint told them of his exploits, they were deeply horrified, to say the least. When his description of the war expanded to species-wide conflict, all but 3 of them left the room. Bernth, who, as it turns out, was not a military admiral, as the Kajorian did not have a military, but a commander of several research ships, and 2 others. I saw them grow more and more sick as Clint continued his speech. Then it turned to the Swarm Empire. Clint's speech was impassioned, the heat of alcohol adding to the fire. The Swarm is the worst perpetrator of these war crimes, a vast army of true-born swarming and dozens of other races. The Swarm war machine marches all over its path. Dozens of races have fallen under their sway. Swarm Empire controls over half the galaxy, and it's quickly gaining control of the rest. All of those who stand in the way are obliterated. Their armies destroy the people, sold into slavery. Worlds are erased from existence by the Swarm, and the whole races fall under their lash. They murder untold billions, and they force the rest to work for their people's killers. They use slaves for everything in the Empire. The Empire was built by the armies, and the Empire is maintained by its slaves. When they— Stop, cried Bernth. I cannot hear any more of this. I must insist that you leave for the good of my crew. You are a creature of violence and death. You have no place amongst the Kajorian, and the Kajorian have no place amongst these stars. We will leave, and we will never come back. You people are too depraved and bloodthirsty. I'm sorry for any offense I give you, but you must leave. We hustled out of the room and led us back to our ship. They bid us a good life and then nearly shoved us out the door. Clint shut the bay ramp door and stood there, staring wistfully at it, his eyes seeming to look through it. The galaxy where there is no war, he sighed. What a place that would be. I almost wish I could go with them. It took me a bit to find my voice. I mentioned before how my race puts a lot of value on the sounds of the person's voice. He had sounded so sad and reflective that I lost myself in the deep melody of his voice. Then why don't you? Because there are things that must be done in this galaxy first. There are those who must be brought to justice, and those who must be saved. But maybe after that. He trailed off, pausing there for only a moment more. Clint headed towards the cabin and seated himself in the captain's chair. He started Susan, and we flew off into the blood-soaked stars. Behind us, the grey ship vanished as it jumped to warp. That is how Clintstone scared off an entire race without lifting a finger, with violent intention. We never heard a word about the Kajorian again. I think that we scared them so badly that they left the squadron forever. Yes, I said us. Clint isn't the only one who is scary, you know. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed. If you'd like to support the channel or the author, all the stuff is down below. And as always, I hope that you guys have a good one, and I'll see you in the next story. Cheers.